Hey guys, and welcome back. Tonight, we descend into the cold and the dark, deep beneath the earth, into caves once home to ancient humans where no daylight has ever reached. And there, lit only by the flicker of a flame, we find them. Paintings of horses, bison, and great beasts long since vanished from the world, rendered with a skill that should not be possible. But stranger still are the figures that stare back from the stone. Tall, dark, looming shapes with wide, hollow eyes and strange forms that are neither fully human nor fully beast, surrounded by marks we cannot read. Dots, lines, symbols, and handprints with missing fingers pressed into the rock tens of thousands of years ago. Someone crawled into the deepest, blackest part of the earth by firelight to leave these watching figures behind. And to this day, no one can explain who they were meant to be or why. So before we descend into this ancient mystery, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy these quiet journeys into history's forgotten and shadowed corners. And let me know down in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight and what hour it is for you. Now dim the lights, settle back, and let the modern world fade away around you. Because these silent images have been waiting in the dark for tens of thousands of years. And tonight, we go down to meet them. Imagine, for a moment, that you are crawling through the dark, not the soft dark of a bedroom at night, with its faint glow of streetlights at the edges of the curtains. This is a different dark altogether. A total, absolute, primordial darkness, the kind that has never once been touched by the sun. You are deep underground, far beneath the surface of the earth, in a passage of cold stone barely wide enough for your body to pass. The only light is the small, trembling flame of the lamp you carry, a flame that throws long shadows that leap and shudder against the rock. The air is still and damp and ancient. There is no sound but your own breathing and the faint drip of water somewhere in the blackness. And then, as you raise your flickering light to the wall, something looms out of the darkness toward you. A great horse painted on the stone. Then another. A bison, its head lowered. A lion. A herd of creatures frozen in motion, surging across the rock face as though they might at any moment break free and thunder past you in the dark. This is the experience, more or less, that has greeted the explorers who have discovered the painted caves of the world. And it is an experience that has never failed to astonish them, to stop them in their tracks, to fill them with a strange mixture of wonder and unease. Because these are not crude scratchings. These are not the simple daubs we might expect from people we too often imagine as primitive and brutish. These are masterpieces, sophisticated, skillful, breathtaking works of art, painted with a confidence and a beauty that can stand beside anything human beings have produced in all the ages since. And they were made, many of them, 20,000, 30,000, even 40,000 years ago, by people working in the deepest and most inaccessible darkness of the earth, by the light of nothing more than a flame. But it is not only the beauty of these images that has haunted everyone who has encountered them. It is the mystery, because for all their skill, for all their power, we do not truly know what they mean. We do not know why they were made. We do not know why these ancient people went to such extraordinary and dangerous lengths to create them in places where almost no one would ever see them. And scattered among the magnificent animals, on the same walls, are other marks that deepen the mystery to the point of true strangeness. Marks that are not pictures of anything we can recognize. Dots arranged in careful rows and clusters. Lines, single and grouped. Strange geometric shapes. Grids and ladders and curving forms, and symbols that repeat again and again across caves separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. These are not random scratches. They are deliberate. They are repeated. They appear to mean something, and no one alive can read them. Let us be clear about what we are looking at here in the dark, because the strangeness of it is easy to underestimate. On these cave walls, ancient human beings painted two kinds of things. First, there are the images, the animals above all, rendered with stunning realism and care. And second, there are the signs, the abstract marks that accompany the images, that surround them, that sometimes seem to be in conversation with them. And it is this second category, the signs, that constitutes one of the greatest unsolved puzzles in the entire study of the human past. Because while we can at least recognize a horse when we see one painted on a wall, even if we do not know why it was painted, we cannot even recognize what the abstract signs are supposed to be. A dot, a line, a shape. What does it mean? What was it for? What was running through the mind of the person who made it, deep in the dark, all those thousands of years ago? Researchers who have devoted their lives to studying these caves have found something remarkable about these signs, something that transforms them from idle marks into a genuine mystery of the first order. When you catalogue the abstract signs found across the painted caves of a region like Ice Age Europe, you discover that they are not infinitely varied. They are not the random doodles of countless individuals, each making whatever shape came to mind. Instead, the same limited set of signs appears over and over again. A relatively small number of recurring forms, perhaps around 30 distinct types, that show up in cave after cave across an astonishing span of time and space. The same handful of symbols used by people separated by tens of thousands of years and by hundreds or thousands of miles of territory. As though they shared something, as though these signs carried meaning that was understood and passed down and preserved across an almost unimaginable gulf of time. Sit with what that implies here in the quiet. If the same signs recur across such vast distances and such vast spans of time, then they were not meaningless. A meaningless mark would not be repeated so faithfully by so many different people over so many thousands of years. The consistency itself is the clue. It suggests a shared system, a code, a vocabulary of symbols that meant something to the people who used them, something important enough to remember, to teach, to reproduce, generation after generation in the sacred darkness of the caves. And if that is true, then these marks may represent something staggering. They may be among the very first attempts by human beings to record information outside of their own minds. The first stirrings of something that would, many thousands of years later, become writing. The first time our species reached for a way to make a thought permanent, to set it down on a surface, to send it forward through time to others. And we cannot read a word of it. This is the heart of our mystery tonight. Not simply that ancient people made beautiful art, astonishing as that is, but that they left behind, alongside that art, what may be a message, a system of meaning, a code that they clearly understood, that meant enough to them to be preserved across the ages, and that has been waiting on these cold stone walls ever since, perfectly intact, perfectly visible, and perfectly indecipherable. We can stand before these marks. We can photograph them, measure them, catalogue them, study them with every tool that modern science can bring to bear, and still we cannot say what they mean. The people who could read them have been dust for 20,000 years, and they took the key with them into the silence. And so the questions multiply in the dark. Who made these marks and these magnificent animals? What were they trying to say? Why did they go so deep into such dangerous and lightless places to say it? Were the signs a language, a calendar, a record, a prayer? Were the animals a kind of magic, a story, a map of the spirit world? And those handprints, pressed into the rock with such terrible intimacy, who did they belong to? And what did it mean to press your living hand against the cold stone and leave its shadow there forever? Over the course of this long night, we will explore every one of these questions, and the strange and competing answers that have been proposed for them. But before we go any deeper into the meaning, we have to confront the single most human, most intimate, and in some ways most haunting of all these ancient marks. Not the animals, not the abstract signs, but the hands on the wall. Of all the things that ancient people left on the walls of the caves, nothing reaches across the gulf of time quite so directly, quite so personally as the handprints. The animals are magnificent, the signs are mysterious, but the hands are something else entirely. Because a handprint is not a depiction of something. It is not a symbol of something. It is a direct, physical trace of a specific human being. When you look at one of these stenciled hands on a cave wall, you are looking at the exact shape and size of a hand that was pressed against that very stone tens of thousands of years ago. It is, in a sense, the closest thing we have to reaching back through time and touching the people themselves. Their hand was there, right there, and its shadow remains. The technique by which these handprints were made only deepens their strange power. Most of them are not prints in the way we might first imagine, a painted palm pressed to the wall. They are stencils made by what we call the negative method. The person placed their hand flat against the rock, fingers spread, and then sprayed pigment all around it, often by holding powdered pigment mixed with liquid in the mouth and blowing it out in a fine mist across the hand and the surrounding stone. When the hand was lifted away, its shape remained, a clean silhouette of bare rock surrounded by a halo of color. Think about the intimacy of that act. To make such a print, the person had to press their own living hand to the cold cave wall and then breathe the pigment around it, an act that is almost like a breath, a part of their very body, fixing the shape of their hand onto the stone. It is an astonishingly personal thing to have done, and it was done countless times in caves all over the world. These handprints are found not only in Europe but across the entire globe, which is itself a profound and puzzling fact we will return to. There are hands in the caves of France and Spain. There are hands in the caves of Indonesia, some of them among the very oldest known art anywhere on Earth. There are hands in Australia and in the Americas. In Argentina, there is a place so covered in them that it takes its very name from them. A cave whose walls are layered with hundreds upon hundreds of stenciled hands, overlapping, crowding one another, a vast collective gathering of human hands reaching out of the rock across the millennia. To stand in such a place must be overwhelming, to be surrounded on every side by the hands of people who lived and died thousands of years ago, all of them seeming to reach towards you out of the stone. And here is where the handprints turn from intimate to genuinely unsettling. Because when researchers studied these stenciled hands closely, they noticed something strange about many of them. In certain caves, a significant number of the hands are missing fingers. Or rather, the stencils show hands with fingers that appear shortened, bent, or absent entirely. Whole sections of fingers simply not there. At some sites, these incomplete hands are not the exception, but a substantial portion of all the prints. And this discovery has produced one of the most debated and disquieting puzzles in all of cave art. What happened to those fingers? Why are so many of the hands incomplete? The theories range from the medical to the ritual to the symbolic, and each is stranger than the last. Some have suggested that the missing fingers reflect real injuries, that these were people who had genuinely lost fingers to frostbite in the brutal cold of the Ice Age, or to disease, or to accident, or perhaps even to deliberate ritual amputation, the sacrifice of a finger joint as part of some ceremony or rite of mourning whose meaning is entirely lost to us. If this is true, then these handprints are a record of real suffering, real bodies marked by the harshness of their world or by rituals we cannot begin to understand. Others have argued that the fingers were not truly missing at all, that the people were bending their fingers down against the palm while making the stencil, deliberately folding them away to create the appearance of a shortened hand. And if that is the case, then the question becomes even stranger. Why? Why deliberately create the image of an incomplete hand? Was it a form of communication, a kind of sign language captured on the wall, each configuration of folded fingers carrying a specific meaning? Was it part of a hunting signal, a gesture language preserved in pigment? We do not know. We may never know. The hands keep their secret along with everything else. And there is another revelation hidden in these handprints, one that overturns some of our oldest assumptions about who made this ancient art. For a very long time, the unspoken image most people held of the cave painter was of a man, a hunter, a powerful male figure creating images of the beasts he pursued. But when researchers began to analyze the handprints carefully, measuring their proportions, the relative lengths of the fingers, the ratios that tend to differ between male and female hands, they found something unexpected. Many of the hands, perhaps even the majority at some sites, appear to have belonged to women, and some of them appear to have belonged to children, small hands pressed against the rock in the deep dark of the cave. This is a quietly astonishing thing to contemplate. Children deep in the caves, women leaving their handprints alongside the great paintings of beasts. Whole communities, perhaps men and women and children together, venturing into the lightless depths of the earth and leaving the traces of their hands upon the stone. It tells us that whatever these caves were, whatever drew people into them, it was not the exclusive domain of some narrow group of male hunters. It was something that involved the whole of the people, the young and the old, the women and the men. And that only deepens the question of what these places meant to them. What was it that brought a child into the terrifying darkness of a cave by the light of a single flame to press their small hand against the cold rock and have its shape sprayed forever onto the wall? What was so important, so sacred, so necessary that they would do such a thing in such a place? The handprints, more than anything else in the caves, collapsed the distance between us and these ancient people. They were not abstractions. They were not primitive brutes. They were human beings exactly like us, with hands exactly like ours, who reached out and touched the stone and left a piece of themselves behind. A mother, perhaps, and her child. A person who had lost fingers to the cruel cold, or who folded them away for reasons we cannot grasp. People who wanted, for some reason we can feel but not fully understand, to say, I was here. I existed. This is my hand. Remember me. And across all those thousands of years, the hands are still there, still reaching, still saying it. We just cannot answer them. But to understand where these hands and these paintings were found, and how the modern world first stumbled upon them, we have to climb back out of the dark for a moment and tell the story of the caves themselves. Now that we have stood in the dark before the animals and the signs and the reaching hands, let us step back and ask the simpler questions. Where are these caves? When were they made? And how did the modern world come to discover them? These galleries of ancient art hidden in the deep places of the earth. The story of their discovery is, in its own way, almost as remarkable as the art itself, full of accident and disbelief and wonder, and it sets the stage for everything we will explore tonight. The painted caves are found in many parts of the world, but the greatest concentration of them, and the ones that have been studied the longest and most intensively, lie in a region of southwestern Europe in what is now France and northern Spain. Here, scattered through the limestone hills and river valleys, are hundreds of caves bearing the marks of Ice Age humans. The limestone is important because it is the nature of limestone to be carved by water over the ages into deep and winding cave systems, with chambers and passages reaching far back into the rock. These caves provided the sheltered, enclosed, lightless spaces in which the ancient art was made and, crucially, in which it was preserved, protected from the weathering and erosion that would have long ago erased anything painted out in the open air. It is partly an accident of geology that we have this art at all. Only the images made deep inside caves survived. Whatever may have been painted on rocks and surfaces in the open world has vanished utterly, leaving us with only the underground fraction of what may once have existed. Let us speak of some of these caves by name, for they have become legendary. There is Lascaux, in the Dordogne region of France, perhaps the most famous painted cave in all the world. Its discovery, in 1940, has become a kind of legend in itself. The story goes that it was found by a group of teenage boys who, exploring the countryside, came upon a hole in the ground, possibly revealed when a tree had fallen, and lowered themselves down into the darkness to investigate. What they found, when their lamplight fell upon the walls, was a vast underground gallery of breathtaking paintings, halls and passages adorned with great bulls, horses, stags, and other creatures rendered in vivid color and stunning movement. They had stumbled, by pure chance, into one of the supreme artistic treasures of the human species, untouched for some 17,000 years. One can scarcely imagine what those boys felt, standing in the dark, the first human beings in 17 millennia to look upon those magnificent walls. There is Altamira, in northern Spain, whose story carries a darker and more cautionary lesson. Altamira was discovered earlier, in the late 19th century, and its ceiling is covered with a magnificent herd of painted bison, so skillful, so sophisticated, so alive, that when the discovery was announced to the scholarly world, the experts of the day refused to believe it. They could not accept that ancient, primitive, Ice Age people could possibly have produced art of such quality and refinement. It was, they declared, too good to be genuine. The man who had brought the cave to the world's attention was accused of fraud, of having hired an artist to fake the paintings, and he died under that cloud of suspicion and dishonor. It was only years later, after his death, as more and more such caves came to light, and the evidence became undeniable, that Altamira was finally accepted as genuine, and the ancient artists were vindicated. There is a powerful lesson in this story, one we should carry with us through this whole night. Again and again, we have underestimated the people of the deep past. We have assumed they were simple, crude, less than us. And again, the evidence has forced us to recognize that they were nothing of the kind. They were our equals in mind and skill and spirit, and we forget that at the cost of misunderstanding them entirely. There is Chauvet, also in France, discovered much more recently in 1994, and containing some of the oldest known cave paintings in the world, dating back an astonishing 36,000 years or more. What makes Chauvet so extraordinary, beyond its sheer age, is the sophistication of its art at such an early date. Here are dynamic, powerful, beautifully observed images of dangerous animals, lions and rhinoceroses and mammoths and cave bears, drawn with shading and perspective, and a sense of movement that we might have assumed took many thousands of years to develop. But there they are, at the very dawn of art, fully formed, as accomplished as anything that came after. Chauvet shattered the comfortable idea that art began crudely and slowly improved. Instead, it suggests that the capacity for great art was there in human beings from very early on, present and complete, tens of thousands of years ago. And, crucially, the painted caves are not confined to Europe at all. This is a point of enormous importance, and we will return to it in depth later. In recent decades, astonishing discoveries have been made far from Europe, particularly in Indonesia, on the islands of Sulawesi and Borneo, where cave paintings have been found that rival or even exceed the European caves in age. On Sulawesi, researchers have documented images that are at least 40,000 years old, and some that may be considerably older still, including not only hand stencils and animals, but what appear to be scenes, narrative compositions showing figures that seem to be part human and part animal. These discoveries have transformed our understanding of cave art from a European story into a global one, and raised profound new questions about how and when and where the human impulse to make such images first arose. We will explore the deep implications of this later in our journey. When were all these images made? The cave art of the world spans an enormous range of time, but the great flowering of the European painted caves belongs to the period of the last ice age, roughly from 40,000 to around 11 or 12,000 years ago. This was the age of the Upper Paleolithic, the later part of the Old Stone Age, when anatomically modern humans, people just like us, lived as hunter-gatherers across a cold and challenging world, sharing their landscape with mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses, cave lions and giant deer, herds of wild horses and bison. It was these people, the Ice Age hunter-gatherers, who crawled into the caves and made the art. And the dating of the art has been pushed back further and further as the techniques have improved, with some markings now claimed to be so ancient that they raise the question of whether modern humans were even the only ones making them, a question we will confront in its proper place. How were these caves dated, and how do we know so much about them? Through the patient work of generations of researchers using an ever-growing array of scientific techniques. The pigments themselves can sometimes be dated, particularly when they contain charcoal through radiocarbon dating. The mineral crusts that slowly form over the paintings can be dated through other methods, giving a minimum age for the art beneath them. The archaeological deposits on the cave floors, the remains of the lamps and tools and pigments the artists used, can be studied and dated. Layer by layer, cave by cave, a vast body of knowledge has been assembled about when these images were made and by whom and how. And yet, for all that knowledge, the central questions remain stubbornly unanswered. We can date the paint. We can analyze the pigment. We can measure the hands and map the signs. But we cannot read the meaning. We know almost everything about these caves except the one thing we most want to know. What did it all mean to the people who made it? To even begin to approach that question, we have to try to understand those people themselves. Who were they, these Ice Age artists? What was their world like? How did they live, think, and see? And how, in practical terms, did they manage to create such sophisticated art in the crushing darkness of the deep caves? Before we can hope to understand why they made these images, we must first try to understand the people who held the lamp and lifted the pigment to the stone. And so, in our next chapter, we go to meet the first artists. Who were they? This is the question that hangs over every painted wall, every stenciled hand, every mysterious sign. Before we can hope to understand what the cave art meant, we have to try, as best we can across the vast gulf of time, to understand the people who made it. And the first and most important thing to say about them is also the thing we most often forget. They were us, not a lesser version of us, not a crude rough draft of humanity. They were anatomically modern human beings with bodies like ours and, crucially, with brains like ours, as capable of thought and feeling and imagination and abstraction as any person alive today. If you could somehow take a newborn child from one of these Ice Age communities and raise them in the modern world, they would, by everything we understand, grow up indistinguishable from anyone else. They could learn to read, to do mathematics, to fly aircraft, to write poetry. The only difference between them and us is the world they were born into, not the minds they were born with. This is worth dwelling on here in the quiet, because the old image dies hard. We have been raised on cartoons and crude stereotypes of the caveman, the shambling, grunting, club-wielding brute, barely more than an animal. It is one of the most persistent and most wrong ideas in all of popular history. The people who made the cave art were sophisticated, intelligent, capable human beings, living rich and complex lives. They had language, almost certainly language as full and expressive as our own. They had social structures, traditions, beliefs, relationships, art, music, and ritual. They passed knowledge down through the generations. They cared for their sick and buried their dead with evident meaning and ceremony. They were, in every way that matters, fully human. The cave art is itself the proof of this. You do not produce work of such skill and beauty and evident meaning without a mind fully equipped for symbolic thought, for planning, for imagination, for the whole rich inner life that we think of as defining our species. What was their world like, the world of these Ice Age artists? It was, in many ways, a harsh and demanding one. They lived during the last great Ice Age, when much of the northern world was colder than today, when great sheets of ice covered vast regions, and when the landscape of Europe was a cold, open environment of grasslands and tundra, very different from the forests that would later cover it. Across these cold plains roamed the great animals of the Ice Age, the megafauna, many of which we see depicted on the cave walls. Herds of wild horses, bison, aurochs, the huge wild cattle from which our domestic cattle would later descend, reindeer, giant deer with enormous antlers, woolly mammoths, vast and shaggy, and woolly rhinoceroses, and the predators, too, the cave lions and cave bears and wolves that competed with humans for survival. This was the world the ancient people moved through, a world of cold and abundance and danger, a world thick with animals on which their entire existence depended. For these were hunter-gatherers, people who lived directly from the land, by hunting the animals and gathering the plants of their world. They did not farm. They did not keep herds or sow crops. Agriculture would not be invented for many thousands of years yet. Instead, they followed the rhythms of the wild, moving with the seasons and the herds, hunting the great beasts, fishing the rivers, gathering whatever the land provided. Theirs was an intimate, profound, total relationship with the natural world and above all with the animals. The animals were everything to them. They were food and clothing from their hides, and tools and ornaments from their bones and antlers, and the very basis of survival. To know the animals, their habits, their movements, their seasons, their behavior, was to know the difference between life and death. And it is surely no accident that it is the animals, above all else, that these people chose to paint upon the walls of their sacred caves. The animals were at the very center of their world, and so the animals are at the very center of their art. Now let us turn to the practical mystery, which is in its own way astonishing. How, exactly, did these people make this art? Set aside for a moment the question of meaning and just consider the sheer physical achievement of it. To create the cave paintings, the artists had to first reach the places where they made them, and these were often not easy places to reach. Much of the greatest cave art is found not near the entrances, in the daylight zones where people might have sheltered and lived, but deep inside the caves, far back in the dark, sometimes at the end of long, difficult, dangerous passages. To get there, the artists had to travel deep underground, crawling through narrow gaps, squeezing through tight passages, descending into the earth, all in total darkness except for the light they carried with them. This alone took courage, knowledge, and determination. The deep cave is not a welcoming place. It is cold, disorienting, and genuinely dangerous, a place where a fall or a lost light could mean death. And yet they went, again and again, into the deepest dark, and they had to bring light. This is a crucial and often overlooked point. There is no light in the deep cave, none at all, and so every moment of the art was made by artificial light that the people created and carried. They used lamps, simple but effective, often made from hollowed stone, in which animal fat was burned with a wick of moss or other plant material, producing a small, steady flame. Archaeologists have found these stone lamps in the caves, the very lamps by whose light the art was made. They also used torches, bundles of burning material that could be carried and that left traces, marks of soot and charcoal, on the cave walls and ceilings. Imagine the scene. The artist, deep underground, in absolute darkness, working by the flickering, trembling, inadequate light of a fat-burning lamp or a guttering torch, the shadows leaping and dancing across the uneven stone, the great animals seeming to move in the unsteady glow. It is a profoundly atmospheric image, and it must have been a profoundly powerful experience to make or to witness. The artists prepared their materials with care and knowledge. They used pigments derived from minerals found in the earth, the iron oxides that give us the reds and yellows and browns of ochre, and manganese oxides and charcoal for the blacks. They ground these pigments into powders, mixed them with binders, perhaps water, perhaps animal fats or other substances, to create paints that would adhere to the stone. They applied the paint in various ways, with their fingers, with pads or brushes made of fur or moss or chewed twigs, and, as we have seen with the handprints, by spraying it from the mouth in a fine mist. They used the natural shape of the rock itself, incorporating bulges and hollows and cracks into their images, so that a swelling in the stone might become the rounded flank of a bison, a natural ridge the curve of a back. This shows a sophisticated artistic sensibility, an ability to see the potential image within the rock and to bring it out. In some caves, there is evidence that they built scaffolding to reach high parts of the walls and ceilings, cutting holes in the rock to support wooden platforms. This was not casual or careless work. It was planned, prepared, skillful, and deliberate, the product of real artistic tradition and training. How did one become a cave artist? We cannot know for certain, but the quality and consistency of the art across vast spans of time strongly suggests that there were traditions, that the knowledge and skill were taught and passed down. The techniques, the styles, the very signs themselves persisted across thousands of years, which means they must have been transmitted from person to person, generation to generation. Perhaps there were individuals of special skill or status who made the art, artists or shamans or ritual specialists. Perhaps the making of the art was itself a sacred act, restricted to certain people or certain times. Or perhaps, as the handprints of women and children suggest, it was more widely shared, a thing the whole community participated in. We do not know. But what we can say is that behind this art lies not random individual impulse, but tradition, knowledge, skill, and intention, sustained across a span of time so vast it staggers the imagination. The people who made it knew what they were doing. They had learned how to do it. And they did it for reasons that mattered enormously to them, reasons we are still struggling to understand. So now we have some sense of them, these first artists. Modern humans, like us in mind and body. Hunter-gatherers of the Ice Age, living in intimate relationship with the great animals of a cold and vanished world. Skilled, knowledgeable, courageous people who ventured into the deep dark with lamps and pigments to create images of stunning power. We have met the artists. Now let us look more closely at what they actually painted. And above all, let us look at the animals, the magnificent beasts that surge across the cave walls, and ask what secrets they might hold. When you look at the great cave paintings, the first thing that strikes you, the thing that has astonished every observer from the teenage discoverers of Lascaux to the most seasoned modern researcher, is the animals. The walls of the painted caves are, above all, a vast bestiary, a gathering of the creatures of the Ice Age world, rendered with a skill and a vitality that can take the breath away. Horses gallop across the stone. Bison lower their great heads. Aurochs, the mighty wild cattle, stand massive and powerful. Stags raise their antlers. Mammoths loom, shaggy and immense. Lions stalk. Rhinoceroses charge. Reindeer leap. The animals are everywhere, hundreds upon hundreds of them across the painted caves, and they are the undisputed heart of this ancient art. And what is most remarkable about them is how alive they are. These are not stiff, crude, schematic representations. The ancient artists captured the animals in motion, in attitude, in character. A horse with its mane bristling, a bison turning its head, a herd in full flight, legs extended, bodies straining. They understood anatomy, the way muscle and bone move beneath the skin. They understood movement, capturing the precise postures of running and standing and turning. They understood the individual character of each kind of animal, the heavy power of the bison, the nervous grace of the horse, the menace of the lion. At Chauvet, the oldest of the great caves, there are images of lions and rhinoceroses so dynamic, so full of energy and life, that they seem almost to move in the flickering light. The artists even use techniques that create a sense of motion and depth, shading to give roundness and volume, the overlapping of figures to suggest a herd, and in some cases the repetition of legs or heads in a way that, in the moving light of a flame, may have created an actual illusion of movement, a kind of Ice Age animation. To paint animals this well, the artists must have observed them with extraordinary closeness and care. And of course they did, for their lives depended on it. These were hunter-gatherers whose survival rested on their intimate knowledge of the animals around them. They watched the herds, studied their movements, knew their seasons and their habits and their behavior with a depth and precision that we, in our world of supermarkets and screens, can scarcely imagine. The animals were not abstractions to them. They were the very substance of life and death, watched and known and depended upon every single day. And that profound knowledge flows directly into the art. These are images made by people who knew their subjects with their whole lives, and it shows in every confident line. But here is the first great strangeness of the animal paintings, the first clue that they are not simply pictures, not merely decoration or record. The animals depicted on the cave walls are not, in many cases, the animals the people most often ate. This is a genuinely puzzling fact. When archaeologists examine the bones found in the living sites of these Ice Age people, the refuse of their actual meals, they often find that the animals they were primarily hunting and eating were creatures like reindeer. But reindeer are not always the most commonly painted animals on the cave walls. Instead, the walls are often dominated by horses and bison, and feature dangerous and impressive creatures like lions, rhinoceroses, mammoths, and bears, animals that were not necessarily everyday food. In other words, the art does not simply depict the menu. It is not a straightforward record of what was hunted and eaten. The choice of which animals to paint was driven by something other than diet, something other than mere practical record keeping. The animals on the walls were chosen for some other reason, some symbolic or spiritual or cultural significance that we can sense but cannot fully grasp. This single fact dismantles the simplest explanation for the cave art, the idea that it was just people drawing the animals they hunted. If that were all it was, the painted animals would match the eaten animals, and they do not. The animals were selected. They meant something. The powerful, the dangerous, the impressive beasts were chosen for the walls, while the humble reindeer that actually fed the people went largely unpainted. Why? What did the horse and the bison and the lion mean to these people, that they should be raised up onto the sacred walls of the deep caves while the animals of everyday survival were left off? We do not know. But the question points us away from simple practicality and toward the realm of meaning, of symbol, of belief. And there is a second great strangeness about the cave art, perhaps even more striking than the first. Where are the people? In this vast gallery of magnificent animals, human beings are almost entirely absent. The ancient artists who could render a galloping horse or a charging rhinoceros with such breathtaking skill almost never painted themselves. Depictions of human beings in cave art are rare, and when they do appear, they are strange. Often they are crude, schematic, far less skillfully rendered than the animals, as though there was some reluctance or prohibition around depicting the human form clearly. Sometimes they are not fully human at all, but appear to be part human and part animal, hybrid figures that we will return to later. The contrast is stark and deeply puzzling. These were people perfectly capable of rendering living creatures with stunning realism, and yet they almost never turn that skill upon themselves. The human figure is the great absence at the heart of the cave art. Why? Why paint the animals in such glorious, lifelike detail and leave out the people almost entirely? Here again, we are driven toward the realm of meaning and belief, and away from simple explanation. Perhaps there was a taboo against depicting the human form, a prohibition rooted in beliefs we cannot reconstruct. Perhaps the art was not about people at all, but about the animals and the powers they represented, the human world being deliberately set aside in these sacred spaces. Perhaps the rare hybrid figures, the part human, part animal beings, hold a clue, suggesting that the boundary between human and animal was understood very differently than we understand it, that the important figures were not ordinary people, but beings that crossed between the human and animal worlds. Whatever the reason, the near absence of humans is one of the defining and most mysterious features of cave art, and it tells us that this was not a record of human life, not a portrait of the people themselves, but something else, something focused intently and almost exclusively on the animals and on whatever they meant. So the animals on the stone, magnificent as they are, only deepen our mystery rather than resolving it. They are not simply the creatures that were eaten. They are not accompanied by the people who painted them. They were chosen, selected, raised up onto the walls for reasons of meaning rather than mere record. The cave art is not a photograph of Ice Age life. It is something far more deliberate and far more mysterious, a vision of a particular set of animals charged with significance, created in the sacred dark. And surrounding these animals, woven among them, accompanying them on the walls, are the marks that take the mystery to its very deepest point. The abstract signs, the symbols we cannot read. It is time, now, to turn to them directly and to confront the strange possibility that ancient humans left us a message we have never been able to open. We come now to the very heart of our mystery, to the marks that have given this video its name, to the thing that no one has ever been able to fully explain. Set aside, for a moment, the magnificent animals. Set aside the haunting handprints and turn your attention to the other marks on the cave walls, the ones that are easiest to overlook and yet may be the most profound of all. The abstract signs, the dots, the lines, the geometric shapes and symbols that appear again and again alongside the great paintings throughout the painted caves. Because while the animals and the hands are mysterious enough, it is these abstract signs that present us with the deepest and most tantalizing puzzle of all. They look, for all the world, like a system of meaning. They look like a code, and we cannot read a single one of them. Let us first describe what these signs actually are, because they are easy to picture once you know to look for them. Scattered among the animals, sometimes overlapping them, sometimes set apart, are marks that depict nothing recognizable. There are dots, single dots and dots arranged in deliberate rows and clusters and patterns. There are lines, sometimes single, sometimes in groups, sometimes arranged like the rungs of a ladder. There are rectangular and grid-like shapes, sometimes called tectiforms, that look almost like structures or enclosures. There are curving, branching forms. There are shapes like spears or arrows. There are circles and ovals and half-circles. There are the hand stencils we have already discussed, which are themselves a kind of sign. And there are forms that resist any easy description at all, strange geometric figures that meant something clearly to the people who made them, but that mean nothing obvious to us. These are the abstract signs, and they are found throughout the painted caves, a constant companion to the animal art. For a long time, these signs were overlooked, treated as secondary, as mere decoration or background to the far more impressive animal paintings. The eye is naturally drawn to the great beasts, and the abstract marks can seem minor by comparison, easy to dismiss as doodles or random scratches or simple ornamentation. But as researchers looked more closely, and especially as some dedicated scholars began to systematically catalogue and compare the signs across many different caves, a startling pattern emerged, a pattern that transformed these humble marks into one of the great puzzles of human prehistory. And that pattern is the one we touched upon at the very beginning of our journey tonight. The signs are not random. They are not infinitely various. They are not the individual doodles of countless unconnected people. Instead, the same limited set of signs recurs over and over across the painted caves of an entire vast region and across an immense span of time. Consider what one researcher found when she undertook the painstaking work of cataloguing the abstract signs across the painted caves of Ice Age Europe. Surveying cave after cave, recording and comparing the marks, she found that the bewildering variety of signs could in fact be reduced to a relatively small number of recurring types. Around 30 distinct signs, give or take, accounted for the great majority of all the abstract marks across this entire body of cave art. Not hundreds of unique symbols, not endless individual variation, but a limited, consistent set, a kind of repertoire that the ancient people drew upon again and again. The same dots, the same lines, the same particular geometric shapes, appearing in caves separated by hundreds of miles and by thousands of years of time. This is an extraordinary finding, and its implications are profound. Because think about what it takes for a small set of specific symbols to recur so consistently across such vast distances and such immense spans of time. It cannot be coincidence. The same 30-odd signs do not appear independently, by chance, in cave after cave across a continent and across 20,000 years, unless they meant something, unless they were shared, unless they were deliberately taught and learned and preserved and passed down across countless generations. The consistency itself is the proof of meaning. These were not random marks. They were a shared system, a common vocabulary of symbols, understood across an entire cultural world that spanned a continent and tens of millennia. The people who made them in one cave and the people who made the same signs in another cave 1,000 miles and 5,000 years away were drawing on the same repertoire, the same set of meaningful forms. They were, in some sense, speaking the same symbolic language. And that is where the full weight of the mystery descends. Because if these signs constituted a shared, consistent, deliberately transmitted system of symbols, then they were, in some meaningful sense, a system of communication, a way of recording or conveying meaning through standardized marks. And that is the very definition of what writing, at its root, is. Now, we must be careful here, because these signs are almost certainly not writing in the full sense, not a system that records spoken language word by word, as our writing does. But they may be something on the long road toward writing, a system of meaningful symbols, a form of visual communication or record-keeping or notation, tens of thousands of years before the first true writing systems would emerge in the ancient Near East. They may represent one of the very first times that human beings tried to externalize meaning, to take an idea out of the mind and fix it onto a surface where it could persist and be understood by others. The first attempt to make thought permanent. The first reaching toward a technology of memory and communication that would, in the fullness of time, transform our entire species. And we cannot read it. This is the heart of the heartbreak and the fascination both. Here, possibly, is one of humanity's first great inventions, the first stirring of symbolic communication beyond speech, preserved perfectly on the cave walls for tens of thousands of years. And we stand before it utterly unable to understand it. We can see that it is a system. We can catalogue its elements, map their distribution, count their frequencies, note which signs tend to appear together and which appear alone. We can bring every tool of modern science to bear upon it. But we cannot crack it. We do not know what a single one of these signs means. We do not know whether a dot means an animal, a number, a direction, a season, a spirit, a name, a sound, or something we cannot even conceive of. The people who knew, who could read these marks as easily as you are understanding these words, have been gone for 20,000 years and more, and they left no key, no translation, no Rosetta Stone to help us. They left only the marks themselves, mute and patient and forever closed to us. It is worth pausing to feel the strangeness of this situation fully. We are separated from the meaning of these signs, not by distance, but by time, and by the absence of any living tradition connecting us to them. When scholars decoded ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, they had the famous Rosetta Stone, which carried the same text in known and unknown scripts, providing the key. When we decipher ancient languages, we usually have some thread connecting them to known languages or known meanings, some context, some bilingual text, some descendant tongue. But for the cave signs, there is nothing. There is no bilingual inscription. There is no descendant tradition. There is no context outside the caves themselves. The culture that produced these signs vanished utterly, and everything about it, its language, its beliefs, its meanings, vanished with it, leaving only these silent marks on the stone. We are in the position of someone who has found a book in a completely unknown script by a vanished people, with no clue whatsoever as to what any of it means, and no possibility, perhaps ever, of finding out. And yet, people have tried. Faced with such a tantalizing mystery, researchers and thinkers have proposed many theories about what the signs might mean, what their purpose might have been, what message they might carry. Some of these theories are cautious and scholarly. Some are bold and speculative. None of them can be proven, and all of them remain, in the end, educated guesses in the face of an unknowable past. But they are fascinating guesses, and they represent humanity's best efforts to reach across the gulf of time and touch the minds of the people who made these marks. Over the next several chapters, we will explore these theories one by one. We will ask whether the signs might be a form of proto-writing, a first step toward recording language. We will ask whether some of them might be a system of counting, of notation, perhaps even a calendar tracking the cycles of the moon or the seasons. We will ask whether they might have emerged from the altered states of trance and vision, the products of the strange experiences that can arise in the deep dark of the cave. Each theory illuminates something, and each leaves much in shadow. Let us begin with the most tantalizing possibility of all, the idea that these marks represent the very dawn of writing itself. Let us begin our exploration of the theories with the most tantalizing possibility of all, the one that, if true, would rewrite our understanding of when and how human beings first learned to record meaning outside of the mind. The idea is this, that the abstract signs in the caves represent a genuine system of communication, a kind of proto-writing, an attempt to convey and preserve information through standardized symbols, tens of thousands of years before the first true writing systems are supposed to have appeared. If this is correct, then the cave signs are not merely art, not merely decoration, not merely ritual marks. They are the very first stirrings of one of humanity's most world-changing inventions. They are the dawn of the written word. To understand why this idea is both so compelling and so radical, we need to understand the conventional story of how writing began. According to the standard account, true writing, a system of symbols capable of recording spoken language, was invented relatively recently in the human story. Only around 5,000 years ago, in the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. There, in the great cities of the Near East, the pressures of complex society, of trade and taxation and administration and record-keeping, drove the development of the first scripts, the cuneiform of the Sumerians and the hieroglyphs of the Egyptians. In this telling, writing is a product of civilization, of cities and states and agriculture, a late invention born of the practical needs of complex societies. Before that, the story goes, human beings had no way of recording information outside of memory and speech. They had art, yes, but not writing, not a system of meaningful symbols for conveying information. But the cave signs challenge this neat story in a profound way. Because if the abstract marks in the caves really do constitute a consistent, shared, deliberately transmitted system of symbols carrying meaning, and the evidence strongly suggests that they do, then human beings were using something like a symbolic communication system, not 5,000 years ago, but 20,000, 30,000, even 40,000 years ago. Not in cities, but in the world of Ice Age hunter-gatherers. Not as a product of complex civilization, but long before agriculture, long before cities, long before anything we would call civilization existed at all. The cave signs would push the origins of symbolic record-keeping back into the deep Paleolithic, tens of thousands of years before the conventional dawn of writing, and would show that the impulse to record meaning in standardized marks was present in human beings from a very early point indeed. Now, we have to be careful and precise here, because the claim can easily be overstated, and the truth is subtle. The cave signs are almost certainly not writing in the full and proper sense. True writing, as we understand it, is a system that records spoken language, that can represent the actual words and sounds of speech, so that what is written can be read back as language. There is no good evidence that the cave signs do this. They do not appear to be a script that records sentences, a way of writing down spoken words. So we should not imagine that the cave artists were writing letters or stories or records in the way that we write. That is not what the signs seem to be. But there is a great deal of ground between true writing on the one hand and meaningless decoration on the other. And it is in that middle ground that the cave signs most likely belong. They may represent a system of meaningful symbols that conveyed information without recording spoken language directly, what we might call a system of proto-writing or symbolic notation or graphic communication. Think of the symbols we use today that are not writing but still carry clear meaning. The symbols on signs and maps and diagrams, the marks that mean danger or direction or quantity. A system like that, a set of agreed symbols each carrying a meaning, could convey and preserve a great deal of information without being writing in the full sense. And the cave signs may have been something of this kind. A shared vocabulary of meaningful marks understood across a whole culture, used to record or convey ideas, information, perhaps stories or beliefs or practical knowledge in a form that could persist on the cave walls across time. If that is what the signs were, then they represent something genuinely momentous in the human story. They represent the first time, as far as we know, that human beings systematically used standardized visual symbols to carry meaning across time and space beyond the reach of individual memory and speech. They represent the first reaching toward a technology of external memory, a way of fixing thought onto the world so that it could outlast the moment and the mind that produced it. And this is, when you consider it, one of the most important things our species has ever learned to do. Everything that we have built, all of our accumulated knowledge, our science, our history, our literature, our law, rests ultimately on the ability to record information outside of the individual mind, to pass it forward through time in a fixed and stable form. And the cave signs may be the first faint beginning of that entire vast development, the first small step on the road that leads, eventually, to every book and every record and every written word that has ever been. There are features of the signs that lend support to this idea of a meaningful system. The limited, consistent repertoire of forms is exactly what you would expect of a symbolic system, where a manageable set of agreed signs carries meaning rather than endless individual variation. The way the signs are sometimes arranged in deliberate sequences and combinations, in particular positions relative to the animals and to one another, suggests structure and intention rather than randomness. The persistence of the same signs across vast distances and times suggests transmission, teaching, a shared cultural code. All of this is consistent with the idea that the signs were a system of meaning, a kind of code understood by the people who made and read them. And yet, and here is the eternal frustration at the heart of this mystery, even if the signs are a code, we cannot break it. Knowing, or strongly suspecting, that the signs carry meaning brings us no closer to knowing what that meaning is. A code that we know to be a code but cannot decipher is, in practical terms, just as silent as random marks. We can say, this is probably a system of meaningful symbols. We can say, these marks probably conveyed information to the people who made them. But we cannot say what any particular sign meant, what information was conveyed, what the people were trying to record or communicate. The code remains locked. We have, perhaps, identified the existence of humanity's first system of symbolic communication, and we are utterly unable to read it. Why can we not break it when we have deciphered so many ancient scripts? Because, as we discussed, we have none of the things that make decipherment possible. We have no bilingual text, no Rosetta Stone pairing the unknown signs with a known language. We have no descendant tradition, no living or recorded culture that inherited and remembered the meaning of the signs. We have no context outside the caves, no way to check a proposed meaning against any independent source. And we have, above all, the staggering barrier of time, 20 or 30 or 40,000 years, across which the entire culture that produced the signs has vanished without a trace except for the marks themselves. Decipherment requires some thread connecting the unknown to the known, and for the cave signs, every such thread was severed tens of thousands of years ago. We are left with a system we believe to be meaningful and have no means whatsoever of understanding. So the idea that the cave signs are a code older than writing is, perhaps, the most tantalizing of all the theories, precisely because it suggests that there really is a message here, a genuine attempt at communication reaching toward us across the abyss of time, and that we are simply unable to receive it. The ancient people may have been trying to say something, to record something, to preserve something in these careful, consistent, deliberate marks, and their message has survived, perfectly intact, for tens of thousands of years. It is right there on the walls, waiting, and we will, in all likelihood, never know what it says. But the theory of proto-writing is not the only attempt to understand the signs. Some researchers have focused on a particular subset of the marks, the dots and the lines, and have proposed a more specific, and in some ways even more startling idea. That these particular marks are not language at all, but numbers. That the ancient people were not writing, but counting. And that hidden in the dots and lines may be one of the oldest records of time itself. Among the many abstract signs in the caves, certain ones stand out for their particular character and have drawn particular attention from those trying to crack the mystery. These are the dots and the lines, the simplest and most numerous of all the marks. A row of dots, a series of vertical lines, small, repeated, deliberate marks, often arranged in sequences, often placed near or upon the images of animals. And there is a theory about these particular marks that is different from the idea of proto-writing, and in some ways even more specific and startling. The theory is that these dots and lines are not symbols of words or ideas at all. They are numbers. They are a system of counting. The ancient people, according to this idea, were using these marks to tally, to record quantities, to keep track of amounts, and, perhaps most remarkably of all, to track the passage of time. The idea that human beings have been counting and recording numbers for a very long time is not itself new or controversial. There are ancient objects, bones and stones marked with deliberate series of notches that go back tens of thousands of years, and that many researchers believe represent tallies, counts of something, recorded by making one mark for each unit. The making of a mark for each thing counted is one of the most basic and natural forms of record keeping, and it appears to be very ancient indeed. So the idea that some of the marks in the caves might be tallies, counts of something, fits into a broader picture of ancient humans using simple notation to record quantities. The question is, counts of what? What were the ancient people counting when they made their rows of dots and lines on the cave walls? Here the theory becomes genuinely fascinating and connects to the animals among which the marks are so often found. Some researchers have proposed that the dots and lines associated with particular animals may be records related to those animals, and specifically to the timing of important events in the animal's yearly cycles. Remember that these were hunter-gatherers whose entire lives revolved around the animals, whose survival depended on knowing the animals intimately, including the timing of their behaviors across the year, when they migrated, when they gathered, when they mated, when they gave birth. Knowing these timings would have been of immense practical importance, the difference between a successful hunt and a failed one, between feast and famine. And so, the theory goes, the ancient people may have been using the marks to record this vital information, to track and remember the timing of the animal's yearly cycles. A recent and much discussed version of this idea has proposed something even more specific and striking. According to this theory, the dots and lines found in association with animal paintings may represent a record of time measured in months, a kind of calendar based on the cycles of the moon. The proposal is that the number of marks associated with a given animal corresponds to the month, counted from some fixed starting point in the year when a key event in that animal's life cycle occurred, such as mating or birth. In other words, the ancient people may have been using a lunar calendar, counting the months by the cycles of the moon, and recording, through the dots and lines, the timing of important biological events for the animals they depended upon. If this is correct, it would mean that the cave marks include not just a counting system, but an actual calendar, a way of tracking the passage of time across the year, tens of thousands of years before such things were thought to exist. The implications of this idea, if it holds up, are remarkable. It would mean that Ice Age hunter-gatherers had developed a system for measuring and recording time, that they understood and tracked the lunar cycle, that they connected this timekeeping to the biological rhythms of the animal world, and that they recorded all of this in a notation on the cave walls. It would reveal a sophistication of thought, a capacity for systematic observation and abstract record-keeping that goes far beyond the simple image of the primitive hunter. It would show these people as careful observers of nature, keepers of records, trackers of time, in a way that connects them across all the millennia to every calendar and every almanac and every act of timekeeping that has come since. The dots and lines, in this view, are not decoration and not language, but data, a record of the natural world and its rhythms, kept by people who needed that knowledge to survive. We must be honest and careful here, however, because this particular theory, the lunar calendar idea, is recent and it is debated. It is an intriguing and carefully argued proposal, but it has not been universally accepted, and other researchers have raised questions and objections. The interpretation of the marks as a lunar calendar tracking animal life cycles is a hypothesis, a possible reading of the evidence, not an established and proven fact. It is entirely possible that the dots and lines meant something else entirely, or that they meant different things in different places, or that we are projecting our own ideas of calendars and counting onto marks that the ancient people understood in a completely different way. The history of attempts to interpret ancient marks is full of theories that seemed compelling and were later abandoned, so we should hold this idea as a fascinating possibility, one of the most intriguing recent attempts to read the cave signs, while remembering that it remains unproven and contested. But even with that caution, the underlying insight is powerful and probably contains real truth, whatever the specifics. The insight is that at least some of the marks in the caves are very likely connected to counting, to recording quantities or timings, to the practical tracking of information that mattered to the lives of the people who made them. Whether or not the specific lunar calendar theory is correct, it seems quite plausible that the ancient people used some of these marks to keep records, to count, to track the cycles of their world. And that, in itself, is a profound thing. It means that hidden among the cave art may be some of the oldest records, the oldest data, the oldest attempts to capture the patterns of the natural world in a fixed and lasting form. The first reaching toward the systematic recording of knowledge that would, much later, become science. There is something deeply moving in this image when you sit with it in the dark. Picture an ancient person, deep in the cave by lamplight, carefully making a row of dots beside the image of an animal. Not idly, not randomly, but deliberately, recording something they had observed, something they knew, something they wanted to preserve and pass on. The timing of the birth of the foals, perhaps. The month when the bison gathered. A piece of hard-won knowledge about the world, knowledge that meant survival, being carefully set down on the stone so that it would not be lost, so that it could be remembered and used and taught. If this is what the marks are, then they are among the most precious things in all of human history. The first records, the first data, the first attempt to capture and preserve the knowledge that human life depends upon. And like everything else in the caves, we can see them and sense their importance and never quite be sure what they say. So the dots and lines may be numbers, counts, perhaps even a calendar, the first records of time and the natural world. But there is another theory about the cave art and its strange signs, one that takes us in a completely different direction, away from the practical world of counting and tracking and into the strangest and most altered realms of the human mind. For some researchers believe that the source of the cave art lies not in observation or record keeping, but in vision, in trance, in the extraordinary experiences that can arise in the deep, dark, silent places of the earth when the human mind is pushed beyond its ordinary boundaries. And to explore that idea, we must descend once more into the deepest dark and consider what the caves themselves may have done to the minds of the people who entered them. There is a theory about the cave art that is different in kind from the others we have considered, and in some ways the most haunting of them all. It does not see the art primarily as a record of the animal world, nor as a system of communication or counting. Instead, it locates the origin of the art in the realm of the mind, and specifically in the strange and powerful states of consciousness that human beings can enter, and that may have been deliberately sought in the depths of the caves. According to this theory, much of the cave art, and especially the abstract signs, may have arisen from trance, from vision, from altered states of consciousness, the products of a mind reaching beyond its ordinary waking experience into something stranger and more profound. To understand this idea, we have to think about the cave itself and about what it does to the human mind to enter it. Consider, once more, the experience of going deep into a cave. We touched on this at the very beginning, but now let us dwell on its psychological dimension. The deep cave is an environment unlike any in the ordinary human world. It is a place of total darkness, absolute and complete, a darkness that the small flame of a lamp can only partly and unsteadily hold back. It is a place of profound silence, broken only by the drip of water and the sound of your own breath and heartbeat. It is a place of isolation, of enclosure, of separation from the entire familiar world of sky and horizon and open air. It is cold and strange and disorienting. And spending time in such a place, deprived of the normal flood of light and sound and sensation that fills our ordinary experience, can have powerful effects on the human mind. We know, from modern understanding, that sensory deprivation, the removal of normal sensory input, can profoundly alter consciousness. When the mind is deprived of its usual stream of sights and sounds and stimulation, it can begin to turn inward, to generate its own experiences, to drift into altered states. People in conditions of extreme sensory deprivation may experience changes in their sense of time, of self, of reality. They may begin to see and hear things that are not there. They may enter trance-like states, dreamlike states, states of vision and hallucination. The deep cave, with its total darkness and silence and isolation, is a natural environment for inducing exactly these kinds of altered states. To go deep into the cave, to spend time in that absolute dark by the flickering and hypnotic light of a single flame, was to enter a place where the ordinary mind could loosen its grip and slide into something stranger. And there is reason to think that the ancient people may have sought out these states deliberately as part of ritual and spiritual practice. Across human cultures, throughout history and around the world, people have used various means to enter altered states of consciousness for spiritual purposes, to seek visions, to commune with the spirit world, to undergo transformation and revelation. The deep cave, as a natural inducer of altered states, would have been a powerful place for such practices. To venture into the dark, into the silence and isolation, perhaps for extended periods, perhaps with fasting or rhythmic sound or other practices that encourage trance, would have been a way of crossing over from the ordinary world into another kind of experience entirely, a way of seeking vision and contact with whatever powers the people believed in. The cave, in this view, was not a gallery or a workshop. It was a threshold, a doorway to another world, a place to go in order to leave the ordinary world behind and enter the realm of vision and spirit. Now here is where this theory connects, remarkably, to the abstract signs and offers a striking explanation for some of them. It turns out that the altered states of consciousness induced by trance and sensory deprivation are associated with particular kinds of visual experiences, and these visual experiences have a consistent character across human beings because they arise from the common structure of the human nervous system. In the early stages of certain altered states, people tend to see particular kinds of patterns, geometric forms generated by the visual system itself. These are sometimes called entoptic phenomena, meaning patterns that arise from within the visual system rather than from the outside world. And they take consistent forms: grids, lattices, zigzags, dots, lines, curves, spirals, and similar geometric shapes. People in trance states across all cultures tend to see these same kinds of geometric patterns because they arise from the shared architecture of the human brain and eye. Look again, now, at the abstract signs in the caves: the dots, the lines, the grids and lattices, the zigzags and curves and spirals, the geometric forms. They bear a striking resemblance to exactly the kinds of patterns that people see in the early stages of trance and altered states. And this has led some researchers to a compelling conclusion. Perhaps the abstract signs in the caves are not language and not counting, but vision. Perhaps they are depictions of the geometric patterns that the ancient people saw when they entered altered states of consciousness in the depths of the caves. Perhaps, having journeyed into the dark and entered into trance, having seen these luminous geometric forms swimming before their inner eye, they then recorded them on the walls, painting the visions they had experienced, fixing their trance imagery onto the stone. The signs, in this view, would be a record of the inner journey, the geometry of vision, the patterns seen on the threshold between this world and the other. If this is true, it casts the entire cave art in a new and extraordinary light. The caves become not galleries but sacred spaces of vision and trance, places where the ancient people went to cross over into altered states and commune with the spirit world. The abstract signs become the recorded imagery of those visionary experiences, the geometric patterns of trance made permanent on the walls. And even the animals might be understood differently, not simply as the beasts of the everyday world, but as spirit animals, visionary beings encountered in the trance state, powers of the other world made visible. The strange hybrid figures we have mentioned, the part human, part animal beings that appear rarely in the caves, fit naturally into this picture too. For such figures, the merging of human and animal are characteristic of visionary and trance experience across many cultures, often understood as spirits, or as the transformed shape of the one who journeys into the spirit world. The whole cave, in this reading, becomes a record of the human encounter with the realm beyond the ordinary, a place of vision and spirit and transformation. This theory is powerful and influential, and it accounts for a great deal: the geometric character of the signs, the deep and difficult placement of the art, the hybrid figures, the sense that the caves were special, sacred, set apart. But like all the theories, it cannot be proven, and it has its critics and its limits. We cannot actually enter the minds of the ancient people. We cannot confirm that they entered trance states, or that the signs are records of vision, however suggestive the parallels may be. It is possible that the resemblance between the cave signs and trance imagery is partly coincidental, that the geometric forms are simply the natural shapes that arise whenever human beings make simple marks, whether in trance or not. It is possible that the theory, compelling as it is, projects a particular modern understanding of shamanism and trance onto people whose actual practices and beliefs may have been quite different. As with everything in the caves, we are reaching across an unbridgeable gulf, constructing the most plausible story we can from fragmentary clues, and never able to confirm whether we have it right. And yet, even with all the necessary caution, the theory of visions in the dark adds something profound to our understanding, or at least to our wondering. It reminds us that the caves were almost certainly not ordinary places to the people who used them, that they were charged with meaning and power and significance, that going into the deep dark was very likely a profound and possibly a spiritual experience. Whatever the precise truth, it seems clear that the cave art was bound up with the deepest dimensions of these people's lives, with their beliefs, their rituals, their encounters with mystery, and with whatever lay beyond the visible world. The caves were special. The dark was meaningful. And the marks on the walls, whether records of vision or counting or communication or something we have not even imagined, came from the very heart of what these people were and believed. But the caves of Europe, remarkable as they are only part of the story. For the same impulse, the same marks, the same reaching into the dark appears across the entire world, in places separated by oceans and continents, among peoples who could never have known of one another. And that global pattern raises questions stranger and deeper than any we have yet confronted. For a very long time, the story of cave art was told as a European story. The great painted caves of France and Spain were discovered first, studied most intensively, and became the center of everything we thought we knew about the origins of art. It was easy, in that light, to imagine that the painted caves were a peculiarly European phenomenon, that something special had happened in Ice Age Europe, some flowering of the artistic spirit that occurred there, and perhaps nowhere else. But in recent decades, that comfortable European-centered story has been overturned dramatically and completely, because we now know that the painted caves are not a European phenomenon at all. They are a human phenomenon, and the same impulse, the same kinds of images, the same haunting marks appear across the entire world in places so far apart, among peoples so utterly separated that the implications are staggering. The discoveries that transformed our understanding came, above all, from the other side of the world, from the islands of Southeast Asia in what is now Indonesia. On the island of Sulawesi and on Borneo, researchers exploring limestone caves found paintings that, when they were finally dated using modern scientific methods, proved to be astonishingly old. Hand stencils, exactly like those in Europe, made by the same technique of spraying pigment around a hand pressed to the wall. Images of animals, including the wild creatures of the Indonesian islands. And the dates that came back were extraordinary. These paintings were not younger than the European caves. They were as old, and in some cases older. Some of the Indonesian cave art has been dated to at least 40,000 years, and certain images may be older still, placing them among the very oldest known art anywhere on Earth, rivaling or exceeding the most ancient European caves. Consider what this means. On opposite sides of the world, separated by thousands of miles of land and sea, by environments utterly different from one another, by populations that had been separated for tens of thousands of years, human beings were doing the same thing at the same time. They were going into caves. They were painting animals on the walls. They were pressing their hands against the stone and spraying pigment around them to leave their stenciled shadows. They were making the same kinds of marks in the same kinds of places in the same ways. And they were doing it independently, without any possible contact or communication between them, because the peoples of Ice Age Europe and the peoples of Ice Age Indonesia had no way of knowing the other existed. This was not a tradition spread from one place to another. This was the same impulse arising independently in widely separated human populations, as though it were something deep in human nature itself. And the Indonesian discoveries did not stop at hand stencils and animals. On Sulawesi, researchers found something even more remarkable, something that pushed back not just the age of art, but the age of storytelling and imagination themselves. They found what appears to be a narrative scene, a composition showing several figures together in what looks like an actual story or event. And the figures in this scene are not simply animals or humans. Some of them appear to be therianthropes, beings that combine human and animal features, part person and part beast. There appear to be human-like figures with animal characteristics, hunting or confronting wild animals. If this interpretation is correct, then this ancient Indonesian painting, dated to many tens of thousands of years ago, may be the oldest known narrative artwork in the world, the oldest depiction of a story or scene, and the oldest known depiction of supernatural or imaginary beings, of figures that do not exist in the natural world but only in the human imagination. The oldest evidence, in other words, of human beings telling stories, imagining beings beyond the real, reaching into myth and the supernatural. This is profound, almost beyond expression. It suggests that the capacity for storytelling, for myth, for imagining supernatural beings and spiritual realities was present in human beings at least 40,000 years ago, and present not just in one place, but across the world. It suggests that the religious and imaginative impulse, the reaching toward the supernatural, toward beings and powers beyond the visible world, is not a late development of civilization, but something ancient and deep and universal in our species. Wherever modern humans went, it seems they carried with them this capacity and this need to make images, to tell stories, to imagine the supernatural, to go into the dark places and leave their marks and their visions on the stone. It was not something that happened once in Europe. It was something human, something that traveled with humanity across the whole earth. And the hand stencils, in particular, take on an even deeper resonance in this global light. The same gesture, the hand pressed to the wall, the pigment sprayed around it, the silhouette left behind, appears in Europe, in Indonesia, in Australia, in the Americas, across the entire inhabited world. People everywhere, separated by oceans and continents and tens of thousands of years, felt the same impulse to leave the print of their hand upon the rock. There is something almost unbearably moving in this. It is as though, across all the divisions of space and time, human beings shared a common need to reach out and touch the enduring stone, to leave the mark of their living hand, to say, in the most basic and universal way imaginable, I was here. I existed. This is my hand. Across the whole world, in the deep dark of countless caves, the hands reach out of the rock, and they are all, in the end, saying the same thing. The global distribution of cave art also deepens every mystery we have explored. If the abstract signs in Europe form a consistent system, what is the relationship between them and the marks found in caves on the other side of the world? Did the same kinds of signs arise independently everywhere, drawn perhaps from the common architecture of the human mind, as the trance theory might suggest? Or did some shared inheritance, some common origin reaching back to before humanity spread across the earth, carry the same symbolic impulses to every corner of the world? These are deep and difficult questions, and we cannot answer them with certainty. But the very fact that we can ask them, the fact that cave art is a global human phenomenon and not a local European one, transforms our understanding of what we are looking at. We are not looking at a regional curiosity. We are looking at something fundamental about human beings, something that emerged with our species and traveled with us everywhere we went, something that speaks to the very nature of the human mind and spirit. And this global perspective leads us, inevitably, to push the question even further back in time. If the impulse to make these marks was present across the world tens of thousands of years ago, where and when did it begin? How far back does it go? We have spoken of art 40,000 years old in Europe and in Indonesia. But the search for the origins of symbolic marking does not stop there. It reaches back further still, into even deeper and more shadowy reaches of the human past, to marks that may be far older than any painted cave, and that raise a question more startling than any we have yet confronted. The question of whether our own species was even the first to make such marks at all. For there is evidence, fragmentary and debated, but genuinely tantalizing, that the impulse to create symbols may be older than modern humanity itself, and that we may not have been the only kind of human being to reach for meaning in the dark. How far back does it go, this human impulse to make meaningful marks? We have journeyed through cave art that is 20, 30, 40,000 years old and marveled at its antiquity. But the search for the origins of symbolic behavior, of the capacity to create and use marks that carry meaning, reaches back further still, into the deepest and most shadowy reaches of the human past. And as it does, it leads us toward a question more profound and more unsettling than any we have yet faced. The question of when and in whom the symbolic mind first awakened. Because the oldest marks of all may be far older than the painted caves, and they may not have been made by people quite like us at all. Let us go back, then, before the great painted caves, in search of the earliest evidence of human beings making deliberate, meaningful marks. As we travel back in time, the evidence becomes sparser, more fragmentary, more debated, but also, in its way, more astonishing. There are objects found in ancient archaeological sites that push the origins of symbolic marking back far beyond the painted caves. There are pieces of mineral pigment, of ochre, that appear to have been deliberately engraved with patterns, with cross-hatched designs, with geometric marks, tens of thousands of years before the great age of cave painting. One famous example, found in southern Africa, is a piece of ochre engraved with a deliberate cross-hatched pattern, a design that someone carefully and intentionally cut into the surface, and it has been dated to many tens of thousands of years ago, far older than the European caves. This is not a picture of anything, not a representation, but it is a deliberate, patterned, abstract design. Evidence that human beings were making meaningful marks, were thinking and expressing themselves through abstract pattern deep in the African past, long before the painted caves of Europe. Discoveries like this have pushed the origins of symbolic behavior back further and further and shifted the center of the story. The capacity for symbolic thought and expression, for making marks that carry meaning, appears to have emerged early in the history of our species, and to have emerged, in all likelihood, in Africa, the cradle of humanity, before modern humans spread out across the rest of the world. The painted caves of Europe and Indonesia, magnificent as they are, may represent not the beginning of human symbolic expression, but a later, spectacular flowering of a capacity that had been developing for a very long time. The roots of the symbolic mind reach down into a past far deeper than the caves, into the early history of our species in Africa, tens of thousands of years before the first great painting was ever made on a cave wall. But there is a further twist, and it is the most startling of all. Because the evidence for ancient symbolic marking is no longer confined to our own species, to anatomically modern humans. There is growing evidence, debated and contested, but increasingly difficult to dismiss, that other kinds of human beings, other human species, may also have made marks, may also have possessed some capacity for symbolic expression. And the species at the center of this evidence is one we have long underestimated and misunderstood, perhaps more than any other: the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals were a distinct kind of human being, our close evolutionary cousins who lived in Europe and parts of Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, long before and then alongside our own species, before they vanished from the earth some tens of thousands of years ago. For a long time, the Neanderthals were the very embodiment of the brutish caveman stereotype, imagined as dim, primitive, shambling creatures incapable of art, symbol, or higher thought. But this image, like so many of our assumptions about ancient humans, has been crumbling under the weight of new evidence. We now know that the Neanderthals were intelligent, capable, sophisticated beings. They made tools, controlled fire, cared for their sick and injured, and buried their dead. And there is now evidence, tantalizing and debated, that they may also have made marks, may also have created art, may also have reached towards symbol and meaning. In certain caves, there are markings, including hand stencils and abstract designs, that have been dated, by some methods, to a time before modern humans are believed to have arrived in the region. If these dates are correct, then the marks could not have been made by our species at all. They would have to have been made by the people who were there before us, by the Neanderthals. There are also reports of other possible Neanderthal symbolic behavior, of objects and marks and uses of pigment that suggest a capacity for symbol and meaning. The evidence is fragmentary, and the dating is difficult and disputed, and not everyone accepts that the Neanderthals truly made art or symbolic marks. This remains one of the genuinely open and contested questions in the study of the human past. But the very possibility is profound. Because if the Neanderthals made marks, made art, reached for symbol and meaning, then the symbolic mind, the impulse to create meaningful marks, was not unique to our own species. It was shared, perhaps, by other kinds of human beings. It may be older than modern humanity itself, reaching back to ancestors and cousins we have long dismissed as mere brutes. Sit with the strangeness and the wonder of that possibility here in the dark. We have grown used to thinking of ourselves, modern humans, as the only truly symbolic species, the only ones who make art and meaning, the unique possessors of the symbolic mind. But the deep past may be telling us otherwise. It may be telling us that there were other kinds of people, other human beings not quite like us, who also went into the dark, who also pressed their hands to the stone, who also reached towards symbol and meaning in their own way. That the impulse we have been exploring all night, the impulse to make marks, to leave a trace, to reach for meaning beyond the immediate and the practical, may be older and deeper and more widely shared than we ever imagined, woven into the very fabric of what it means to be human in all the various forms that humanity has taken. This deepens the mystery of the marks to an almost unbearable degree. We began by trying to understand the meaning of signs made by ancient modern humans in the painted caves. Now we find that the very origins of mark-making reach back further than those caves into the deep African past of our species, and perhaps even beyond our species entirely, into the minds of other kinds of human beings who walked the earth before and alongside us. The impulse to make meaningful marks appears to be one of the oldest and most fundamental things about humanity. In the broadest sense, older than the painted caves, older perhaps than our own species, a thread reaching back into the very deepest darkness of the human story. And everywhere we follow that thread, we find the same thing. Marks that clearly meant something, made by people reaching for meaning, and meanings that are utterly and perhaps permanently lost to us. So we have followed the marks across the world and back through time to their deepest origins. And everywhere, the same mystery confronts us. People made these marks. They meant something, and we cannot read them. But there is one more great question we have not yet directly confronted, a question that underlies all the others, and that may be the deepest mystery of all. Not what the marks mean, but why the caves? Why did the ancient people go to such extraordinary lengths, into such dangerous and lightless places, to make their art and their marks at all? What were the caves for? Why the deep dark? It is time to confront that question directly, and to consider what it may tell us about the ancient human soul. We have explored what the ancient people painted and the marks they made, and the many theories about what those marks might mean. But running beneath all of these questions is a deeper and more fundamental one, a question that may hold the key to everything, and that is perhaps the most genuinely mysterious of all. Why the caves? Why did the ancient people make their greatest art and their most enduring marks, not in the open, not in the daylight, not in the places where they lived, but deep underground, in the cold and the dark, in places dangerous and difficult to reach, where almost no one would ever see them? What were these caves for? What drove human beings, again and again, across tens of thousands of years and across the entire world, to descend into the deep dark and leave their images and their signs upon the stone? This question, more than any specific sign or symbol, may bring us closest to the heart of the ancient human mind. Let us first appreciate just how strange and deliberate this behavior was. The great cave art is not, for the most part, found at the entrances to caves in the daylight zones where people would naturally have sheltered and lived. It is found deep inside, often far back in the cave systems, sometimes at the end of long, narrow, treacherous passages in chambers that could only be reached by crawling and climbing through the dark for considerable distances. These were not convenient places. They were not comfortable places. They were not places where people lived their daily lives. They were difficult and dangerous to reach, and once reached, they were experienced in total darkness, lit only by the flames the people brought with them. To make art in such places required enormous effort and real risk. People had to journey deep into the earth, carrying their lamps and pigments and tools, navigating the treacherous dark in order to create images that, once made, would be seen by almost no one, hidden away in the lightless depths. Why? Why go to such extraordinary lengths to make art in places where it could barely be seen? This single fact, the deep and deliberate placement of the art, rules out many simple explanations and points strongly towards something profound. The art was not made to decorate living spaces, for it was not made in living spaces. It was not made to be casually admired, for it was hidden in places almost no one would visit. It was not made for everyday, practical purposes in any obvious sense. The effort and danger involved, and the deliberate choice of the deepest and most hidden places, suggest that the act of making the art and the places where it was made were themselves charged with deep significance. The deep cave was chosen deliberately, for reasons that mattered enormously to the people, even though, or perhaps precisely because, it was dark and hidden and hard to reach. The cave was special. It was set apart. It was, in all likelihood, sacred. What might the caves have meant to the ancient people? Here we can only speculate, but the speculations are rich and revealing. One powerful idea, which we touched upon in exploring the trance theory, is that the deep cave was understood as a threshold, a boundary, a doorway between worlds. To go into the cave was to leave the ordinary world of light and air and daily life, and to enter another realm entirely, a realm of darkness and silence and mystery, perhaps the realm of the spirits, of the dead, of the powers that govern the world. The cave, descending into the earth, may have been seen as a way into the underworld, into the hidden dimensions of reality, into the place where the spiritual powers dwelt. And to make art there, in that sacred and liminal space, may have been an act of profound religious significance, a way of reaching toward those powers, of communing with the spirit world, of working some kind of magic or ritual at the very threshold between the worlds. There are several specific ideas about what the ancient people may have been doing in these sacred underground spaces. One long-standing theory is that the art was connected to hunting magic, that by painting the animals, the people sought to gain some power over them, to ensure success in the hunt, to magically influence the world on which their survival depended. By creating the image of the animal, Perhaps they sought to capture something of its essence, to bring it under their power, to call it into being for the hunt. This idea has its problems, as we have noted, since the painted animals do not always match the hunted ones, but some version of a magical or ritual relationship to the animals may still have been involved. Another idea is that the caves were places of initiation, where young people, or those undergoing some transformation of status, were brought into the dark to undergo trials and revelations, to be taught the sacred knowledge of their people, to emerge changed. The journey into the terrifying dark, the encounter with the painted beasts and the mysterious signs, the experiences induced by the cave itself, all of this may have been part of rituals of initiation and transformation. Another idea, connected to the trance theory, is that the caves were places of vision and spiritual journey, where ritual specialists, the people we might call shamans, went to enter altered states, to travel to the spirit world, to seek visions and power and contact with the supernatural. We cannot know which, if any, of these ideas is correct, and the truth may have involved several of them, or something we have not imagined at all. But what unites them, and what the deep placement of the art so strongly suggests, is that the caves were sacred spaces, places of ritual and spirit and profound significance, and that the art was bound up with the deepest dimensions of the people's lives, with their beliefs, their religion, their encounters with mystery and the supernatural. The cave art was not casual decoration. It was not idle doodling. It was something that mattered enormously, something worth great effort and real danger, something connected to the most important and most sacred dimensions of human existence. The people went into the dark because the dark meant something, because the deep cave was a place of power and mystery and contact with the beyond. And this, perhaps, brings us closer than anything else to the ancient human soul. Because what it tells us is that these people, these Ice Age hunter-gatherers, were not merely concerned with survival, with food and shelter and the practical business of staying alive. They had an inner life, a spiritual life, a reaching toward meaning and mystery and the powers beyond the visible world that was so strong, so central to who they were, that they would descend into the terrifying dark again and again to express and pursue it. They had religion in some form. They had ritual. They had a sense of the sacred, of the boundary between this world and another, of powers and meanings beyond the everyday. They were, in this deepest sense, profoundly like us, possessed of that same restless reaching towards something more, that same need to find or make meaning in the face of a vast and mysterious world. The caves are the evidence of that reaching, the trace of an ancient spiritual life as real and as deep as anything we know. And yet, for all that we can sense this, for all that we can feel the sacredness and significance radiating from these deep painted places, we still cannot say with certainty what the people believed, what they were doing, what it all meant to them. We can feel that the caves were sacred and still not know what gods or spirits or powers the people sought there. We can sense that the art was bound up with ritual and meaning, and still not know what rituals were performed, what meanings were intended. We stand at the threshold of their spiritual world, able to see that there is a world there, able to feel its depth and power, and yet unable to cross over into it, unable to truly understand it. The caves give us the unmistakable presence of ancient meaning and withhold from us its content. And that, in the end, may be the truest and most haunting fact about them. We know that they meant something. We will perhaps never know what. And it is to that hard and humbling truth, the limits of what we can ever know, that we must finally turn. We have journeyed far tonight, down into the painted caves, through the theories and the marks and the deep questions, and now we arrive at a place of honesty, a place where we must reckon directly with the limits of what we can ever truly know. Throughout this long night, again and again, we have come up against the same wall. We can describe the cave art. We can date it, measure it, catalogue it, study it with every tool that science possesses. We can propose theories, some of them compelling, about what it might mean. But we cannot confirm those theories. We cannot read the signs. We cannot enter the minds of the people who made them. And it is worth pausing now, in these final chapters, to understand why this is so, why the cave art may hold its deepest secrets forever, and what it means to stand before a mystery that we may never solve. The fundamental problem is the absence of context and the absence of any thread connecting us to the meaning. When we understand something from the past, we usually do so because some chain of connection links it to what we already know. We can read ancient texts because we can trace their languages, because there are related languages or descendant tongues or bilingual inscriptions that give us a way in. We can interpret ancient artifacts because we have other evidence, written records, continuous traditions, comparable objects whose use we understand that help us make sense of them. We build our understanding of the past out of connections, out of threads of continuity that link the unknown to the known. But for the cave art, especially the abstract signs, almost all of these threads are severed. The culture that produced them vanished utterly, tens of thousands of years ago. Its language is gone, leaving no trace and no descendant. Its beliefs are gone. Its traditions are gone. Everything that would give the marks their context, that would tell us how to read them, disappeared with the people who made them, leaving only the marks themselves, floating free of all the meaning that once surrounded them. Think of what it would take to truly understand the cave signs and how impossible those conditions are to meet. To read the signs, we would need either a key, some equivalent of the Rosetta Stone that paired the unknown signs with a known language or known meanings, or a living tradition, some continuous line of cultural memory that had preserved the meaning of the signs across the millennia, or at the very least a rich context of other evidence that could constrain and guide our interpretations. For the cave signs, we have none of these. There is no key, no bilingual inscription, no pairing of the signs with anything we can read. There is no living tradition, no people who remember what the signs meant, for the cultures that made them vanished long before any historical memory. And there is little context, for the signs exist almost in isolation, marks on cave walls with little else to tell us how they were used or understood. We are in the position of someone confronting a message in an utterly unknown code made by a vanished people, with no key, no context, and no possibility of asking anyone what it means. The decipherment that has unlocked so many ancient mysteries is, for the cave signs, very likely impossible. And there is a deeper problem still, more subtle and more humbling. Even our theories, even our best attempts to understand the cave art, are shaped and limited by our own minds, our own assumptions, our own ways of seeing the world. When we look at the dots and lines and propose that they are a calendar, we are reaching for a concept, the calendar that belongs to our world, and projecting it onto the ancient marks. When we look at the geometric signs and propose that they are records of trance visions, we are drawing on modern understandings of shamanism and altered states and reading them into the deep past. When we look at the animals and propose hunting magic, or the caves and propose sacred thresholds, we are constructing the most plausible stories we can, but we are constructing them out of our own concepts, our own categories, our own ways of understanding the world. And the ancient people may have understood reality in ways so different from ours that our concepts simply do not fit, that our questions do not even make sense in their terms. We ask what the signs mean, what they were for, but the very framework of meaning and purpose that we bring may be alien to how they thought. We may be projecting our own minds onto theirs and mistaking the reflection for the truth. This is one of the great dangers in trying to understand the deep past, and one of the great humbling lessons of the cave art. The people who made it were human, like us, with minds like ours in their fundamental capacities, but they lived in a world utterly different from ours, with beliefs, concepts, and ways of understanding reality that we can scarcely imagine and can never fully recover. The gulf between us and them is not a gulf of intelligence or capacity, for in those they were our equals. It is a gulf of world, of culture, of the entire framework of meaning within which they lived. And that gulf may be, in the end, unbridgeable. We can reach across it with our theories and our science and our imagination, and we can touch something. We can sense the presence of meaning. We can feel the humanity of the people who made the marks. But we cannot fully cross it. We cannot truly enter their world, see as they saw, understand as they understood. The cave art holds up a mirror to the limits of our knowledge and reminds us how much of the human past is and will always remain beyond our reach. We must be honest, too, about the temptation to fill the silence with our own inventions. Faced with a mystery as profound and as tantalizing as the cave art, there is always the temptation to claim more than we can know, to propose confident solutions, to insist that we have cracked the code or understood the meaning. There is no shortage of bold theories and confident claims about the cave art, some of them serious and scholarly, some of them wild and speculative, some of them frankly fanciful. And the honest truth is that we should be skeptical of any claim to have fully solved the mystery, to have definitively read the signs or explained the art. The serious researchers who have spent their lives studying these caves are, for the most part, deeply cautious about what can and cannot be known, careful to distinguish what the evidence supports from what remains speculation. The mystery of the cave art is real, and it is deep, and it resists the easy and confident solutions that our discomfort with mystery tempts us to embrace. Sometimes the most honest and the most respectful thing we can do in the face of the deep past is to admit what we do not know and may never know. And yet, this admission of the limits of our knowledge is not a defeat, and it is not a reason for despair. There is something valuable, even beautiful, in standing honestly before a genuine mystery, in resisting the temptation to explain it away, in allowing it to remain what it is, profound and open and unresolved. The cave art reminds us that the human story is older and deeper and stranger than we can fully grasp, that there are dimensions of the human past that will always exceed our understanding, that we are connected to people across tens of thousands of years whom we can sense but never fully know. And rather than diminishing the cave art, this mystery is part of what gives it its power. The marks on the walls are not less moving because we cannot read them. In some ways, they are more so. For in their silence, in their refusal to give up their meaning, they speak to us of the vastness of time, the depth of the human past, and the profound and humbling truth that we are latecomers in a story far older and far richer than we can ever fully know. And if we cannot read their message, we can at least understand what their very existence tells us. And that, as we will see, is something profound. If we cannot read the signs, if we cannot decipher the specific meaning the ancient people intended, then what, in the end, can the cave art tell us? Is the mystery simply a dead end, a locked door, a message we will never open? No, for even if the precise content of the message is lost to us forever, the existence of the message, the very fact of the marks, tells us something profound, something that needs no decipherment, something that reaches across the gulf of time more powerfully than any specific meaning could. The cave art is a message in a deeper sense than the literal one. It is a message about what human beings are and have always been. And that message, at least, we can receive. Consider what the cave art proves simply by existing. It proves that tens of thousands of years ago, human beings were not merely surviving, not merely struggling from meal to meal in brutish ignorance. It proves that they had rich inner lives, that they made art of breathtaking skill and beauty, that they reached toward meaning and symbol and the sacred, that they told stories and imagined supernatural beings, that they tracked the rhythms of their world and perhaps recorded them, that they went into the dark in search of vision and spirit, that they pressed their hands to the stone in an act of profound and universal human expression. It proves that the people of the deep past possessed the full richness of the human mind and spirit, the same capacities for art and imagination and meaning and wonder that we possess today. The cave art is the evidence, written on stone across tens of thousands of years, that to be human has always meant more than mere survival, that the reaching toward beauty and meaning and the beyond is not a late luxury of civilization, but something present in our species from the very beginning, woven into the very fabric of what we are. And this is a message that crosses the gulf of time intact, that needs no decipherment, that we can read as clearly as the ancient people could. When you stand before the painted animals, you do not need to know the specific beliefs of the artists to recognize the skill, the care, the artistic vision in the work, to feel the kinship with the mind that made it. When you see the stenciled hands, you do not need to read any signs to understand the gesture, the reaching out, the leaving of a trace. The I was here that needs no translation because it is universal to humanity. When you contemplate the effort and danger the people undertook to make their art in the deep dark, you do not need to know their religion to sense that they were reaching for something beyond the everyday, something sacred and profound, the same kind of reaching that has driven human beings in every age. The deepest message of the cave art is not in the specific signs we cannot read. It is in the whole of it, the art and the marks and the hands and the deep dark places, all of it together testifying to the richness and the depth and the fundamental humanity of the people who made it. And that message we receive loud and clear across all the thousands of years. There is a particular and moving dimension to this when we consider the abstract signs specifically. Even though we cannot read them, even though their content is lost, the signs tell us something extraordinary simply by being what they are. They tell us that the ancient people were reaching toward exactly the thing that would, in time, transform our entire species. They were reaching toward the recording of meaning, the fixing of thought onto a surface, the creation of marks that could carry information across time and space beyond the limits of individual memory and speech. Whether the signs were proto-writing, or counting, or notation, or the recording of vision, they represent the human mind reaching toward externalized meaning, toward the technology of memory and communication that would eventually become writing and everything that writing made possible. In the cave signs, we are witnessing, perhaps, the first stirrings of one of the most important developments in all of human history, the first faint beginning of the long road that leads to every record and every book and every written word. And even though we cannot read what the ancient people wrote, we can recognize what they were doing, can see them reaching toward the same thing we ourselves rely upon every day, the preservation of thought beyond the moment, the message sent forward through time. For that, in the end, is what the cave art is, a message sent forward through time. The people who made it could not have known who would receive it, could not have imagined us, their descendants of tens of thousands of years later, standing before their work in the electric light, studying it with our instruments, wondering at its meaning. But they sent it forward all the same, this art, these marks, these hands, fixing them onto the enduring stone where they would last across the ages. And we have received it. We cannot read all of it. We cannot understand all of it. But we have received it, and in receiving it,